Okay, hello and welcome to today's webinar. Thanks to those of you who have joined us for this UK-Australia Free Trade Agreement webinar. My name is Stuart Keane. I'm a Global Engagement Manager at the Australian Trade and Investment Commission and also the Head of Community at Fintech Australia, Australia's peak industry body for financial technology. Today's session is aimed at supporting tech businesses, both in Australia and the UK, to understand and utilise the Free Trade Agreement and to help you conduct cross-border trade and investment activities between the two countries. As you may know, the Free Trade Agreement entered into force on the 31st of May this year, and further to that, it's very important that businesses understand what's in the FTA for them and how to use it, and that's why we're here today. So to that end, Austrade, the Australian Government's Trade and Investment Promotion Agency, and the UK Government's Department for Business and Trade have partnered together to deliver this joint webinar. And we're really thrilled to have all of you here with us today as well. Before we go on, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we are on across Australia, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and we pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. For everyone's reference, we are recording today's webinar, so we will make it available via Austrade and DBT at a later date. If you're able to, or if you have to jump off early, that's absolutely fine. We will share the recording around. And while I'm on that housekeeping, please do feel free to put any questions in the chat box as they pop up into your mind, because I will be addressing the questions later on as we go through. Today, we're joined by some amazing panelists, so I'm very, very excited to introduce them very briefly, and then we'll go into some deep dive questions with them later on. We have Richard Cowan, the UK Consul General based in Brisbane, Anastasia Nisnyanitsa, the Australian Trade and Investment Commissioner based in London, Lisa Eisen, CEO and founder of Skyjed, and George Riddell, Director of Trade Strategy at EY in the UK. This is one of two webinars for tech businesses that we're delivering on the Australia-UK Free Trade Agreement. Today, of course, we'll focus on fintech or financial technology, and then in a week from now, at the exact same time of day, on the 26th of July, we're covering broader tech. So very specific focus on financial services today, and then next week, broader technology will be covered. Today, we'll proceed by firstly providing an overview of the two-way trade and investment flows across the free trade region, so Australia and the UK. Then we will cover some of the macro trends in Australia and the UK. That's important because the business opportunities are the reason why you should be interested in this trade agreement and why you should come to your amazing support staff to tap into their knowledge to understand how you can utilize these benefits. We will then move on to a panel discussion focused on how business can utilize the FTA to their advantage. And we're very grateful to have both Lisa and George on the panel to join us there. At the end, as I mentioned, we'll have time for some Q&A, so please do feel free to put your questions in the chat box and we'll go from there. So having provided that introduction, I'd like to now provide a snapshot of the two-way trade across the markets, trade and investment, I should say, and a quick overview of the Free Trade Agreement. Okay, so you can all see those amazing and impressive numbers there. So this is the existing trade, and I guess the trade prior to the ratification of the Free Trade Agreement that was occurring between Australia and the UK. So some very large and meaningful numbers, but actually as we go on, as the Free Trade Agreement comes into force, hopefully these numbers are increasing rapidly and your export dollars are growing enormously. So obviously some really awesome headline figures here. Australia is UK's 25th largest trading partner, and the UK actually exported over $10 billion worth of, 10 billion pounds, I should say, worth of goods and services to Australia in 2022. On the other side, in 1920, the UK was Australia's 5th largest trading partner, and the exports were worth over 21 billion Australian dollars. So really, really meaningful figures there. And actually you can see on that right-hand side as well, the UK is Australia's 2nd largest source of investment, and investment in 2019 reached $686 billion into Australia. We'll jump on to the next slide. Thank you. So the agreement overview, what is the Free Trade Agreement? Very high level points. So it was signed in December 2021, and 18 months later, on the 31st of May 2023, it was entered into force. This is actually a really exciting time for financial technology businesses. Austrade, Global Victoria and Investment New South Wales were leading a fintech delegation in London at the time. So on the 31st of May, there were 14 Australian financial technology businesses at level 39 on Canary Wharf. Level 39 is the Fintech accelerator or hub in the UK. And we had a couple of panel discussions and networking events so that Australian businesses could connect with UK fintech businesses and vice versa. And actually was on the 31st of May, which I think is really, really meaningful. Some other bits and pieces about the free trade agreement. There are 32 chapters, there are 4 annexes, there are 9 side letters and more than 2,000 pages. But importantly for us, there is a chapter on financial services. There's also a chapter on innovation. And so that's very relevant for fintech businesses. We'll jump on to the next slide. Thank you. So some of the benefits of the free trade agreement for yourselves. You can see those points there, but businesses can consider that the deal eliminates tariffs on exports, and it goes further than any Australia or UK trade agreement that we had previously. It also supports the economy for future through the dedicated innovation chapter that I had mentioned before. The deal includes ambitious commitments to work together in addressing the shared challenges of environmental conservation, women's economic empowerment and poverty reduction. And it includes Australia's first ever development on gender equality and chapters that relate to that. So very, very important as well. Jump on to the next slide, thank you. We've got some highlights and some advantages of the free trade agreement. So the removal of tariffs, of course, that applies to some services businesses, but also very impactful for goods businesses and exporters of food and agri and things like that as well. It allows businesses to trade and invest more freely, creating opportunities for Brits and Aussies to collaborate on shared challenges. Some of the highlights there, as I mentioned, removal of tariffs, improved digital trade, the financial services chapter and innovation chapter, and the world's first chapter dedicated to innovation and strategic innovation dialogues that drive commercialization of new technologies. So it's not just the fluffy word of innovation, it's actually meaningful things that can help drive the collaboration between Australian and UK fintech businesses, leveling up the Australia-UK fintech bridge, which has been enforced for a number of years now, taking it to that next level so we can collaborate further with potential partners in the UK. A piece that we will hear about later is the mobility of people as well. So access to great talent, which is something that I know at Fintech Australia, some of our member companies are struggling with or have struggled with over the past years. So increased talent, increased mobility for people to move between the two markets, to do their job and to utilize those skills that they are so well versed at. Thank you, Rob. Okay, so now that I've provided that overview and we're getting into it, I'd actually like to pass on to our market expert, Trade and Investment Commissioner to London at Austrade, Anna Nishnianitsa. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks very much, Stu. Not sure if I'm an expert, but I have been here for a couple of years and hopefully can share some really useful insights with you all. It's great to see everyone on a call. Good afternoon to everyone in Australia. Good morning to everyone in the UK. I will talk a little bit about why UK for Australian companies and where we are seeing opportunities, and then I'll hand over to Richard to talk a little bit about Australian market for the UK companies. So we'll jump straight into it. We'll go to the first slide. As Stuart already so well pointed out, UK is an important export market for Australia. It's a large market, but it's also been rapidly growing. And I think it's important for us to all acknowledge the fact that there's been a significant economic downturn globally. It has impacted UK, absolutely. You might have seen a lot in the media about the the significant inflation of 10%, the cost of living crisis. They are all the realities within which we operate. And as businesses expand to the markets like the UK, they do need to be mindful of that. However, within that kind of complexity and that environment, it is still one of the largest technologies markets in the world, and it is still one of the markets that attracts the largest amount of investment into tech businesses. It's the market that grows and a significant number of unicorns, startups and scale-ups, and it is a market that's still ranked really highly for innovation. Interestingly, while we have seen significant tightening up around VC investment around the world, UK still outperforms all of the major countries. It's in the I guess the smallest reduction compared to others like the US, and it is still ranked really high up there as number 3, and it is performing everyone else in Europe significantly. So still a very attractive market for tech businesses. So if we go to the next slide, we'll zero in a bit more in terms of what it means for fintechs. So a significant fintech market, 2,500 fintechs across banking, lending, insurtech, regtech, payments, wealth tech, you name it. So there is a very strong fintech ecosystem that exists in the UK. We are seeing that there's also a really high level of adoption and engagement in financial services technology across UK citizens. So some interesting stats there around the 71% of UK citizens at least using one fintech, the adults moving to having digital only bank accounts, and that's really accelerating and rapidly growing. I mentioned investment. UK is an attractive destination for those companies that looking to raise VC funds, and fintech is actually one of the strongest areas of investment in the UK. It's only the level of fintech investment in the UK is only second to the US, and it's well ahead India, who's ranked 3rd in the world for specifically fintech investment. So it does perform really well, and it does offer you a very welcoming environment. So Stu touched on a little bit on the Australia-UK FinTech Bridge and the regulators working together, which is obviously a great advantage. But outside of that, the UK's regulations always been ahead of the curve when it comes to financial services. So there's been a number of, I guess, initiatives over the last 10 years that made it a very interesting and attractive environment for fintech businesses to innovate, and really was driving this creation of a strong fintech ecosystem in the UK. So whether it's the open banking legislation, which UK led on, and then Australia adopted it into the consumer data rights, whether it's the review of its current payments regulation, adoption of PSD2 to really kind of even out the playing field and encourage more innovation in financial services, the support of PRAs to offer new banking license, which led to the significant creation of neobanks. All of that has created a really exciting environment, and the UK is still working hard to lead the way. And for example, there's some real progress that's currently being made here on the development of the central bank digital currency, and really looking at how the legislation regulation can stay ahead of the curve, which is quite interesting. The Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, so equivalent to ASIC in Australia, also have a number even of sandboxes that they run to offer companies opportunity to innovate and test their products, and they also offer an innovation hub pathway to businesses. So very, very attractive environment from a regulatory perspective. Of course, UK is home to one of the largest global financial centres, being London, which is quite attractive. And it also has a pretty strong pool of talent. We all talk about competition of talent. We'll talk about mobility later. But let's face it, having such a strong ecosystem around fintech, having such a strong ecosystem around financial services means that there is a lot of talent in the financial services industries that you can tap into. And finally, I would say all of this has led to the fact that UK fintechs have been growing at a much higher rate to any other businesses, tech, I guess, scale-up businesses here in the UK. I think that environment has a lot to do with it. So if we go to the next slide, just a couple of areas of opportunity that we think exist for companies. They're basically the key trends that we are observing in the UK market, and you might want to look into and explore further. We will think that open banking will continue to gain momentum here in the UK. And obviously with the consumer data rights in Australia, there's a lot of similarities and opportunities for adoption across both markets. We are seeing greater collaboration between fintechs and traditional financial institutions here in the UK market, which is really exciting and really opening up more opportunities for partnerships for Australian fintechs. There is a strong focus on cryptocurrencies and digital assets. Here, we're all quite concerned about cybersecurity. So any solutions that are helping us secure or better regulate and manage how financial services are administered are very popular in this market. There's a high level of adoption of artificial intelligence across and integration into fintech services. There's also obviously a lot of focus on the cost of living crisis and how financial technology can help access to finance more equitable and affordable, and address some of the, I guess, inequalities in the system and help people find better affordable offerings and solutions. A strong focus on sustainable finance. Sustainability, ESG is a big topic across the UK. And I think we will continue to see more and more integration in the financial services in this market. So the topic of embedded finance and decentralized finance remain to be front of mind for everyone. So there's some areas that you might want to consider if you're thinking about the UK market, and the FTA will make it easier. So before we go into the detail on FTA, I will hand over to Richard to talk about a bit more about opportunities in the other direction. So over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Anna, and good evening from Brisbane, everybody. It's great to be joining you across Australia and back there in the UK. Look, so if we could move on to my first slide, please, we'll dive straight into it. Just to say a few things about the Australian market. So some messages that I would like you to remember and can I take home from today. I think the first thing is that Australia's financial services sector punches well above its weight. It's a $10 trillion, that's 10 trillion Australian dollar or 5 trillion UK pound financial sector. It's got the world's 5th largest pool of pension assets. And some of Australia's banks are also among the world's largest banks by market capitalization. And specifically on fintech, it's a $4 billion industry with 800 fintech companies here in Australia. The second thing I'd like you to remember about Australia is that it's really tech savvy. I've been here for 6 months, and I mean, I jokingly say that I hardly know what Australian money looks like, because Australian contactless payments, Australian apps are so good, so well advanced, so easy to use. And then the third and final thing that I'd ask you to remember about the Australian market is that Australian consumers are really rich as well. So, I mean, that's another slight joke, but actually higher disposable income rates here are, quite different to those in the UK. Anyway, just to keep things moving, let's go on to the next slide and look a little bit more about why Australia and why it might be a good market for you. So the first thing that I would say is I think Australia has the right legislation in place to make it good for you as UK fintech companies. We've already heard the consumer data right mentioned this evening. It went live in 2020. It gives consumers greater access and control over their data. It's very similar to the UK legislation that passed in 2017. And potentially as a UK company, that gives you a little bit of a head start if you've been active in the fintech sector and active in that data space, because it's being rolled out here and there's a big demand, and Australia is very keen to buy in and look at new products. So in this Why Australia space, the second thing that I would say is Australia's big banks and fintech sector really wants to invest. Recently, we were talking to one of the big four banks here, and they were telling us how they're investing in fintechs, that they've set up a specific fund for doing this. They've already invested in 2 UK companies, and they were looking, they don't want to in-house this. They've tried it, it's difficult. They want to be able to buy this in. So they are looking for more products in personal banking, in mortgages, in wealth management, and in trade finance. We've also heard the UK-Australia FinTech Bridge mentioned this evening. That is supporting companies in both directions, and we've had about 50 UK fintechs coming through that program and operating successfully here in Australia. So in this space on Why Australia, I mean, the kind of third point I would like to land with you is people have been really, really successful here. Look, you've got that visual there in front of you of all of the different people that have had success, but special shout outs to Revolut, Wise, Currency Bound, and Record Sure. So all of that kind of means that there's big demand, big demand for your payment technologies, big demand for your reg tech, and big demand for things around financial crime and fraud prevention. But then if we could move on to the next slide, my last slide, and I know I'm moving through things quite quickly here, but I just want to make sure that we do have time for questions, because I think that's probably the most rewarding part of the evening for us. But just looking at this point quickly, collaborating for the future. Look, AISIC, the Australian regulator, is progressive. It has an innovation hub, and it wants to work closely with fintech companies. The free trade agreement has built upon a fantastic relationship and locks us into dialogue and regulatory cooperation for the future. And that strategic stability for the future is another thing that makes Australia a really good market for you. Because I think the things that worry people at the moment in international trade and in fintech are the security and reliability of your supply chains, data, and ESG. And the free trade agreement locks us into strategic conversations around all of that and security on our data control and our data regulations. So it does really do something different and bring opportunities for you. And then just what I'd like to say quickly, and people have kind of alluded to, is that this whole industry, as you know, I mean, I don't need to tell you this, but it's built on human capital, right? So we need to get people moving in both directions, talking to each other, and that means kind of increased mobility, and we'll probably come on to that a little bit later in the question point and unpack some of that for you. But finally, just to end on all of this, I'd like to give a plug for some of the events that we've got coming up and invite you to take part in those. So next month, we've got a UK FinTech trade mission to Australia, and then in October, we've got a UK digital trade mission to Australia. So please do get in touch. We'd love to have you come along and join us as part of that, and we'll be very happy to share further details with you. So I'll close there and pass back to Stu.
Thanks very much, Richard. That's great. And we are very excited from the FinTech Australia side to welcome the delegates at the end of August over for Intersect Festival. So those of you who are sitting on the webinar hoping you'll be able to meet some of the great FinTechs that are coming from the UK, if you're attending FinTech Australia's Intersect Festival across the 30th and 31st of August, then you will have that chance. Great. Okay, so we're going to jump into the panel discussion now, and that means I'll welcome Leisha back to the panel and also Ed to the panel. Great. And actually what we'll start with, Lisa, if you could give a quick introduction and a little bit of information on SkyJet, that would be great. And then we'll do the same from Ed, and then I'll jump into some questions for everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. So hi everyone. So I'm Lisa Rice, and so I founded Skyjet around about 5 years ago. So Skyjet's a product lifecycle and governance platform, and we launched in Australia. So I think we're a real live example of what we're talking about today. So now scaling here into the UK market as part of our growth strategy.
And then I'll throw it over to George Riddell from EY. Thanks, George.
Everyone, great to be here. So George Riddell, I'm a director of trade strategy at EY based in our UK team. And what we do is sort of working with my team is help clients overcome some of those trade challenges that have been mentioned that are happening around the world, and really take advantage of the different trade agreements. Being Australian originally, but here in the UK, have a particular interest in making sure that the UK-Australia FTA is as successful as possible.
And George, we might dive a little bit deeper on that. So what are the big opportunities you're seeing now for Australian companies or for UK companies? Specifically, actually, with regards to procurement, if you have any examples, that would be great.
Sure. So I think, it's about we going through the presentation. There's obviously a lot of different aspects of the FTA, and I think that's one of the challenges for businesses when they're confronted with these, 100-page long legal texts, quite large documents as to what does it actually mean for them in practice. And I think, as you say, there's three main areas on the fintech side where there are, significant benefits to the agreement. The first is that mobility piece, both in the UK and Australia. It is now easier for Australians to come here to work in the UK and vice versa in Australia, with new visa routes being opened up. Data flows is obviously something that's incredibly important, making sure that that's put on a proper legal footing when you're operating between the two jurisdictions, and there's no concerns that suddenly you're not going to be able to transfer and process that data. And then when it comes to procurement, I mean, both nations have a fairly open procurement system in terms of sort of who can bid for government contracts. But that said, there are additional benefits with some of those thresholds being lowered. So more procurement opportunities that are published and issued by both governments are now available to be bid on by Australian companies here in the UK. So making sure that you're checking that Crown Commercial Service procurement portal, I think is a pretty good start there, because Australian companies now have that ability to be bidding for those procurement opportunities.
Yeah, it's a great point, and lots of opportunities there for sure. Thank you very much, George. Lisa, I'm keen to hear on the opportunities you're seeing for your business as obviously a founder and executive officer at Skyjet.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, before I dive into some of the details, probably the key point I'll make is just around the growth opportunity in this market for fintechs and regtechs and tech companies, because for me, with Skyjet, it was a strategic decision in the business plan to enter into this market because of the size and the diversity of businesses over here, particularly in that kind of mid market and top tier enterprises over here. And so it was part of our growth decision to come into the market, but also we started to get triggered requests from companies over here to find out about our solution. So that's why we entered into this market, and it's been the base for our growth over here. So I think we're a great example. We're scaling rapidly. We've got more than 100 companies on the platform now, and since I've entered this market, the other point I would make is once that you get over here, it's an excellent sort of footprint and springboard to be able to base yourself for opportunities also in adjacent markets in Europe, and to be able to work effectively in the time zone when you're based over here. So definitely that growth opportunity. And then I think, probably the other point I'd make when you're scaling out a technology sort of software business, when you're entering in the market, that area around, mobility of staff is really important. not just in being able to attract top talent to build out your team, which is what I've been doing over here, but when you're in that market expansion stage and sort of scaling and building out your go-to-market plan, you also, want to be able to bring people across from your Australian team to set in that foundation. So in my example, I've come across here and I've recruited a team. I've had some of the Australian expertise come off, and we're rapidly building out the team here. So just that talent mobility at that scaling stage, I think, is an important area for fintechs and tech companies.
Sound advice, especially for the early stage, where the people are so important and integral in a business. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to jump over to Richard now, and I have a question about the purpose of a free trade agreement and how can, in practical terms, a free trade agreement support export success?
Stu, so look, the really obvious thing about free trade agreements is that they eliminate tariffs, and this agreement has eliminated pretty much all tariffs between Australia and the UK. But I would say that's the short-term tactical bit. The long-term strategic bit about this free trade agreement is locking the UK and Australia together into future kind of standards, future collaboration. And there's some really big areas that we're doing this in. So it's greater regulatory cooperation. People have already mentioned commitments on procurement. We've got recognition of qualifications. There's things like electronic verification of documents and signatures. And we've also talked a lot about migration. So perhaps I'll pause there and allow others to come in and elaborate a little bit. But it's about locking us together, locking us into a space where we could be confident about the future, because when you're confident about the future, you trade well together, and that's the basis of the UK-Australia relationship. You trade with people you trust.
Good point. I think you set the platform perfectly for hopefully George to provide any examples he has of companies that you're working with at EY who are actually utilising this, George.
So I think just to drill down into one of those points that Richard and others have made around regulatory cooperation, it's quite a nebulous concept in when we're just saying it here on the webinar. But what does that really mean in practice? And I think, practically speaking, the UK and Australian governments and regulators are going to be meeting multiple times a year in order to try and address any, bilateral trade frictions that could arise in the relationship going forward. And what that means for businesses is that, if you have any concerns or potential issues that you experience when you're trading between the UK and Australia, please do go to DFAT or the Department for Business and Trade in the UK, because it's their job in order to resolve those issues through that regulatory cooperation. So it's not a one and done, oh, we signed the FTA, now go off and use it. There is meant to be that sort of continuing relationship. And as businesses, I think it's incumbent on us to be bringing those concerns to government officials and regulators as and when they arise.
Thanks, George. I think it's a really good point, especially from what we're seeing at Fintech Australia. Sometimes we say, okay, it's great, let's have an improved dialogue between the FCA and ASIC or between our treasuries. Sometimes the industry or small startups don't actually know what that means and how they can have a voice. Industry groups like Innovate Finance, like Fintech Australia, play a role there. And we actually really need the startups or the scale-up businesses to voice their concerns, share their problems, so that we can create an industry voice to go to the regulators with. So there are truly channels there, but please ensure that you share them share your voice with the industry bodies that you have there to be able to access that support. Just a little note from me from what we're seeing in the industry here in Australia. Okay, I'll jump over to Anna, and we're actually going to speak a bit more about digital trade and the data provision. So how do these changes that have come in through the FTA impact or support the businesses that are looking to get involved in the two-way trade and investment?
Stu, and look, I'll provide, I guess, the generic overview, but maybe Lisa wants to jump in afterwards and provide something a bit more practical on this point as well. I think importantly, the agreement will enable the free flow and movement of data between the two jurisdictions. So what does that mean in practice? You no longer have to host data in servers in a new jurisdiction. You can share data across borders between the two jurisdictions, and you don't have to go through the restrictive approval processes that currently exist to be able to share and move the data across the two jurisdictions, which I believe have also been quite costly for businesses as well. So that free movement of data, I think, will really benefit a number of businesses, but obviously fintech is based on data, so I think that's a huge benefit for fintechs going forward. And probably one little spin that I would add on that is I'm quite keen to also see what innovations fintech will come up now that we have this movement of data between the two countries and two borders. What else can you develop and implement that can actually, I guess, build on this to help us do more business together across the two countries? I think the other aspect of the digital trade is also around digitizing the actual trade. So that means the use of electronic contracts, the use of electronic signatures, and really moving to enabling transactions to be genuinely done digitally across borders. And that's, I think, quite interesting area that fintechs can leverage and build on. There's already some fantastic solutions that are out there where businesses are offering authentication and digital signing of contracts, etc. But they will now be able to really build on these new provisions to offer that at scale as well, but also have benefits to their own businesses in terms of having certainty that they can transact digitally. Also. But yeah, I'm not sure if Lisa, you wanted to kind of provide more of a business perspective on someone who's already doing it here in the UK.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anna. So look, I think a couple of practical examples from me. So this free flow of data is obviously a really important area because, any kind of strategic software company these days wants to provide, insights to their customers and partners, and sitting under that is the challenge when you're scaling up is, setting up all your infrastructure and those global data sets. That's a really important area. So in my example, it's setting up those data sets around, product lifecycle governance. So setting those up, but, enabling you to be able to share those, the data with your enterprise customers over here, but also the partners that you're partnering with. So that becomes really important to, growing and providing value in your solution. So definitely a priority for us. And then I think a second area, which is sort of slightly related, is just around, and I'm living this at the moment, it's just around the protection of your intellectual property. Obviously, most sort of fintech, regtech companies, over the years, I've invested a significant amount in research and development to drive our innovation and to drive our focus on, the customer requirements in this market and in global markets. So being able to, protect that intellectual property as you're scaling and entering into these new markets, and the protection of your source code is, critical to your business plan, critical to your growth, and also, the investment that you're getting from investors. They want to be able to see that you're actively, protecting your intellectual property as you grow and innovate. So that's probably the second pragmatic area that I'd see in addition to your global data sets.
Thanks for those examples, Lisa and Anna. That's great. Interestingly, Fintech Australia hosted some events recently in Melbourne on the consumer data right, which is our open banking model. It's modeled off that was crafted in the UK years before. But one of the themes of a panel discussion was data being the new oil. obviously the value there is enormous. We were also in the US recently and met with some people at MasterCard, and MasterCard are now spruiking that they are a data company, not a payments company, which we found really interesting. So just that importance now is really changing. Data applications, IP, and the jurisdictional similarities and the trust that we have Australia and the UK, it just means that it's so much more meaningful. So thank you. Richard, we're going to speak a bit more on mobility. So I have a question for you. I know we've touched on it previously this morning or this evening. People mobility provisions have been promoted as one of the major wins of the FTA. So could you please outline some of the key changes and how you see businesses benefiting from this?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing to say is if you're under 35, there are big benefits to this agreement. Unfortunately, I don't quite fall into that category, but almost. Look, so on both sides, the working holiday scheme, as it's commonly known, the youth mobility scheme, has upped its age limit to age 35. From the 1st of July this year, UK passport holders have been able to apply for that in Australia. And from the 1st of July next year, from the 31st of January next year, it will go the other way, and Australians going to the UK will be able to have that additional 5 years as well. You're able to extend those visas for a longer time, but also there are some other, in addition to this, there's some other really important mobility provisions. So one of them is that for Brits going to the UK, the skilled labour list, which the Australians have in place for areas of skills need, has been lifted for British nationals. So any Australian company or any British national going to Australia doesn't have to be subject to that. And then also there's a really big important point about intra-company transfers, which have become a lot easier in both directions.
Thank you. And then some of the practicalities. George, are you seeing this with clients or seeing this even within your own teams or company at EY?
Very much something that we're advising clients on actively when it comes to using the new visa routes as they come online. I think in terms of that sort of combination of youth mobility and intercorporate transferees, it's really a great opportunity, and we're starting to take advantage of this ourselves, of really promoting the sort of young and up and coming talent that we have, that we're able to really develop the careers of our people as we sort of move them between the UK and Australia, gain more experiences, exposed to different worldviews and different business models. And I think that's something that is a real tangible benefit that already we're starting to see come through from the enhanced cooperation between the two countries.
Jump in here as well, Stu, if that's okay. Would like to spruik a little bit the Innovation and Early Exchange Careers Pilot that will be launched on the 25th of September. The people can already actually go and express interest in it, but the applications will be accepted from the 25th of September. So that was agreed under the Free Trade Agreement as a pilot initially for British innovators to come and work and live in Australia. And if the pilot is going to go well, that we are hoping that it will also then be reciprocated for Australian innovators to come over to the UK. So there are two streams under the pilot. One is for kind of early stage graduates who can come and work in Australia for up to a year, and one for more experienced innovators who can come and work in Australia for up to 3 years. The reason why I'm mentioning mentioning it because I think that's a great opportunity to bring British talent over to Australia, both for the UK businesses who are looking, who are setting up and growing their operations in Australia, and they want to bring some of their British talent across, but also for Australian businesses who are growing their Australian businesses and could tap into this amazing talent pool to help grow their businesses in Australia also. So yeah, more information, we can provide more information if that's of interest, but I think that's also a really exciting new pathway to help us exchange more talent and I guess address some of the challenges that are out there around attracting the right talent.
Thanks, Anna. And then on Lisa, obviously you spoke about your personal move over to the UK from Australia. Are you thinking about mobility for staff and other people you're within your team?
Yeah, exactly, Stuart, because I mean, as I was saying, when you sort of scaling up and entering a new market, it's certainly about, building out the team on the ground over here and recruiting in, business development, customer success and technical roles to support your customers as you're growing. But the second part of that is that when you've sort of got deep knowledge in your sort of foundation team, to speed up that process of bringing on new team members, you need to be able to kind of share that knowledge from your existing teams based in Australia. So for me, it's that sort of two things: building out a talented team, but also being able to kind of bring over, like myself, or bring over other team members that can come for a period of time and share that knowledge strategically with the team, so that you're growing out the knowledge and the culture in the team over here. So that two-way flow is important at that pragmatic entry scale growth stage.
Absolutely. And a note to everyone now, we have about 10 minutes remaining. So I have 2 questions for the panel, but if you have any questions coming in from the audience, please put them in the chat box or the Q&A, and I'll address them in about 5 minutes. So this one, again, for yourself, Lisa, and then George for some examples where you have them. Why the UK and why Australia? Obviously, there are 200 plus other countries out there, but why is this market right for Skyjet? And then George, for your clients you're working with, why have they chosen one of those? We'll start with Lisa, thanks.
Yeah, so look, as I said, I mean, this market was always the sort of focus of my sort of strategic business plan, and what's driving that is, as I said, the size of the market, but also to some of the discussion earlier, we're a product lifecycle governance platform, and the regulatory regimes over here, and the level of innovation from the FCA around embedding that lifecycle governance in your business and the oversight of your products for not only your customer focus, but also your sustainability and preventing greenwashing. They're really important areas that are on the agenda over here, as Anna was saying. So, the market is quite mature around those. I'm finding that enterprise clients in financial services, in also, in energy, telco, manufacturing, etc., they are actively sort of focused on those regulatory regimes and lifting the standard of their product governance. So with all that happening in this market, it makes it an obvious opportunity in terms of the size of it. But like any scale up business, it's all about timing. So when you're in a market that there's sort of growth trends that are driving an agenda, that's very, very good for your sales cycles. So that second dimension, I think we have found over here, particularly the tier 1 and the mid-market enterprise companies over here, that sort of innovation and adopting lifecycle governance is firmly on their agenda. So that's quite an opportunity for you when you're scaling up. So that was the focus for us coming over here, and since being here, as I mentioned before, what I've found is, well, it's a lot easier being in this time zone. when you're trying to grow a business, just practically. But also, you know, as I said, the opportunities as a springboard into the adjacent European countries with, you know, similar regulatory frameworks and enterprise, you know, pain points that they're trying to address with innovative fintech and regtech. Those adjacent markets are also a significant opportunity that you can tap into when you're building out a team over here.
Can I jump in quickly? So sort of what we're hearing from clients, and you know, sort of the three of the factors I think have already been mentioned. Size of market, obviously key. UK is still, you know, a big and decently sized market for these types of services. There are the cultural factors. You know, the fact that there is a shared language and, you know, legal system certainly does make it easier for companies to understand the two countries, and it makes moving between the two a little bit easier. There's also the regulatory regime, and I think, you know, the UK, for all of, shall we say, the uncertainty caused by the last couple of years and leaving the European Union, the regulators and Parliament are trying to be innovative on the regulatory side. A good sort of example of that is the Electronic Trade Documents Bill that's currently going through the UK Parliament, that's looking to sort of make sure that we have the digitalization of different trade documents, that, you know, you're no longer needing a wet stamp on a piece of paper for bills of lading and other shipping documents. And it's insane that we still have that on the legislative books, but, you know, really seeking to change that. And I think that is going to, you know, play into a huge number of different trade tech services that are going to be coming online in the next little while. The final factor that I think, you know, important to speak about as well is the ecosystem. So, you know, it's not just, you know, the one company providing the services, it's also what do you have here in the UK, where it's, you know, not just London, but other hubs as well. You've got, you know, big financial institutions, the VCs, the, you know, specialized law firms. There is an ecosystem of financial and professional services providers that is driving a lot of innovation in the market at the moment. And I think, you know, it's quite an exciting thing to be part of.
Thank you, George. So I'll ask the final question of Anna, and then Richard, if you have anything to add, please do. And then we have one question that's coming from the audience, but noting about 6 minutes remaining. So we'll make these ones quick fire if we can. And it's the last question I have for you, Anna and Richard, is with regards to the financial services chapter in the free trade agreement that we've heard so much about. It's set to eliminate barriers and improve market access, but what is there? What are those key points in the financial service chapter that we should keep a lookout for?
Benefit of making it short, I'll try to summarize it in saying that it will basically enable fintechs to operate on equal footing. So whether you are, if you are in Australian fintech setting up and growing an entity in the UK, you will be treated the same way as a UK fintech, and vice versa. If you're an Australian, if you're a UK fintech setting up in Australia, you will be treated the same way as an Australian fintech. So yes, there are still regulatory requirements that you have to pass, but there's no additional restrictive requirements that apply to you as being an international business. Those have been removed for you to be treated on the equal footing in each other's jurisdictions.
Thanks, Stu. So if I could just answer maybe a slightly different question or make a slightly different point. People have been talking about the UK, London being a hub for European operations as well. Could I just say that Australia is also a really important hub in Asia Pacific for fintech. It's a really important test bed for many big major international companies. It's got a really diverse population here. Its time zones work really well here. So it's a great platform for that as well. But totally agree with what Anna's just said about the FTA and the financial services regulation. Yeah.
With you on that, Richard. Please, UK FinTech, come and join us in Melbourne or in Sydney. There's a great home for you here, and obviously lots of access to to move your people, your teams into the market, companies to connect with and partner with as well. So it's a great point. Now I have one question from the audience, and George, I think it may be for you, but any of the panelists, I'm happy if you jump in. Does the UK have a plan to mandate e-invoicing?
E-invoicing is accepted and encouraged here in the UK. HMRC have published quite detailed guidance on the question of e-invoicing, what standards are required, what constitutes a proper e-invoice. So certainly there is, an encouraging regime at the moment. And also, that's in the context of the broader plans around making tax digital. So we are seeing, particularly around VAT, quite substantial moves in order to get off paper-based forms and into sort of more regular digital transfer of data between the tax authority and individual businesses. On the question of mandatory invoicing, from my understanding at the moment, that isn't being considered, but sort of as we progress the whole making tax digital, I would imagine that, as more and more businesses start to use e-invoices, that we might end up there, but we aren't right now.
Thank you, George. Was there anything to add there? Lisa, I thought you were ready to go.
No, I was just agreeing with that comment. Yeah, I'm seeing that similar sort of trends from my perspective. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, I think we have some concluding slides and some information there for our participants to be able to connect with our teams. But firstly, and finally, I would like to, of course, thank Anna, Richard, for your speaking, for your insights that you've shared, and Lisa and George as well for those proven examples and the case studies that we have. So thank you so much for joining and sharing this evening or this morning. For all of our participants, for dialing in as well. Please do feel free to get in touch with Austrade or the UK DBT for more information. If you would like to scale your business into Australia or the UK, they are there to support you. That concludes the session. Thank you so much.